I had some connections that helped me in that respect. I don't think I told you about it. I first came up here, I had to work for a living. I went out and got a job painting. I just thought I could at least swing a paintbrush and it wouldn't bother me. It's the kind of work I wouldn't have to take home with me and worry about when I was home. I laid my brush down. I was through till I came back. And everything was union here in those days. I joined the Painters Union. Well, they elected me as their treasurer. They thought I was a Baptist preacher, I'd be honest with their money and wouldn't steal it from them, I guess. So I became the treasurer of the Painters Union. And then after a while, they wanted me to be their business agent. Now, all a business agent did back in those days, we didn't have any squabbles or anything like that. Just go around and check with the contractors to see how many men they needed and how they were doing. And if any question did arise, you just go and try to settle those questions. We never had any question between the union and any of the contractors. Occasionally there's a question between a painter and the contractor. Sometimes the painter was wrong, sometimes the contractor was wrong. The painter was wrong, I told him. Anyway, then I was elected to go as what they called a delegate to the Building Trades Council that they had here. So that's all the construction people who worked together to try to keep things rolling good. And then they elected me president of the Building Trades Council. And I was going as a representative of the Building Trades Council and the Painters Union to the Alaska Federation of Labor annual meeting in Juno. A few days before I went, 2 FBI men came to see me. They said there are 3 people going down to that labor convention who could possibly be elected president of the convention. We have run a background on all of you 3. You're one of them. These other 2 men are card-carrying communists. And we don't want the communists taking over the labor organizations in Alaska. Now, this was during the days of an intense Cold War, during the time when we were having a lot of trouble with Russia and with communism in America, during the days when J. Edgar Hoover was the head of the FBI. And he was really against the communists. And they said to me, we believe that you can get elected, and we want to know, if you are elected, would you serve? Would you consent to let them put your name in? Be elected as president of the Alaska Federation of Labor, because we don't want these communists in there. Well, I thought about it and prayed about it. I got down to Juno, and some of them came to me and they wanted to nominate me as the president. And I felt like maybe I ought to do it for Alaska, the country. So I let them do it. I was elected unanimously. I got every vote. So I thought that that was an answer to the question whether I should be or not. So I was president of the Alaska Federation of Labor here. Now, a lot of folks thought that a preacher shouldn't be in anything like that, but it gave me a connection. It gave me a connection with a lot of men. And it gave me a connection with a lot of laboring men. And I witnessed to them. Individually, I witnessed to them. It was my privilege to win some of those men to Jesus Christ, and to win some of the women to Jesus Christ, too, who were in the labor unions like the waiters, well, restaurant workers, and office workers, and people like that. Won those to Jesus Christ. I remember we were down in Ketchikan for an Alaska Baptist Convention once. And Louise Miller, who was the head of the restaurant workers down there, I visited with her and got her to come to the convention. And the last service of the convention, we had an evangelistic service. We went out that afternoon and visited and put out publicity on it from house to house and up and down the streets in Ketchikan. And I preached an evangelistic service, and Louise Miller was saved. Everybody in southeastern Alaska knew Louise Miller. She joined the church and was baptized, and was a great influence for the church and for the Baptists, and a soul winner down there until she died. Well, just a few years ago, Louise died. One man here whom I won to the Lord, Charles Newton, who was in the plumbing business, finally had his own plumbing shop, and others from time to time, because I had this relationship with those people, and they had a respect for me. They respected me. They knew I was sincere, that I meant business for God, and they would listen to me, talk to them about Jesus. And it helped me with some of the politicians. Back in those days, labor was a pretty powerful political influence here, and nearly everything that worked in Alaska was union workers. I got acquainted with the governor, Governor Ernest Greening, and all the other political leaders. They would come to me. I would talk to them. I had the governor in my home, visited in my home. I visited in his home down in Juno in the governor's mansion. He would come to church, at our church, when he was in town, bring his wife, and if anybody else was with him, he'd bring them. He'd embarrass some of his followers sometime. When he came to church, he'd walk all the way down to the front, sit right on the second pew. And they'd trailing along kind of sheepishly behind him, going that far down on the front rows of a church. But anyway, I did have an influence. I know in 1948, Ernest Greening came to me, and a guy named Vic Rivers, who was the head of the Democratic Party here then, and Stan McCutcheon. They're all dead now. But they came to me and said, we'd like for you to be Secretary of Alaska. Actually, the Secretary of Alaska was the Lieutenant Governor of Alaska. And he was appointed by the President. And Harry Truman had just been elected President. This was in '48, and he was going to reappoint Ernest Greening as the governor, but the guy who was the Secretary of Alaska was an alcoholic. They said he's an embarrassment to us. He stays drunk all the time, and he's no good at all. And if you would consent to be the Secretary of Alaska, we've made all the arrangements to have you appointed as Secretary of Alaska. Well, I thought that was kind of good that they had that much confidence in me, but I told them I can't do it. God didn't send me to Alaska to politic. God sent me to Alaska to preach. I'm just going to have to stay here in this church and preach. I don't want to be Secretary of Alaska. Ernest Greening said, but we're going to have statehood before long, and I'm going to run for Senate, and I'll get elected. I want to take you to Washington, D.C. with me and teach you the ropes there. When I retire, we can run you for the Senate. I said, no, I'm a preacher. I intend to be a preacher. I intend to stay a preacher. So I just thought it was an idea that they actually had enough confidence in a Baptist preacher to want him to be a part of their operation, but they didn't understand me either. I didn't want to be that. And I got out of the labor business just as soon as I could, because my church was getting bigger all the time and it needed me all the time. And I finally got to the place to where the church could pay me enough salary to where I could leave everything else off, and so I left everything else off and started giving every bit of myself to the building of the church. But these other things actually didn't hurt me. They gave me some contacts with people whom I won to the Lord and who were influential in reaching out and bringing people into the First Baptist Church.